The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of architecture, a floating citadel of diplomacy suspended in the cold void of space. It was where the most powerful races of the universe gathered, where empires were born and fell, and where wars were decided with words instead of weapons. For centuries, humanity had fought to earn its place among the elder races. Against all odds, they had climbed from being dismissed as a primitive, warlike species to holding a coveted seat at the council. They were the youngest race ever admitted, a race of survivors, innovators, and, some would argue, troublemakers. But now, in a single vote, everything had changed. The chamber was filled with the murmurs of alien delegates as the ruling verdict was announced. The Speaker of the Council, a towering insectoid being with shimmering golden carapace, clicked its mandibles as it read the decision aloud. By unanimous vote, the human species is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately, all human embassies and representatives are to be recalled. The Terran coalition is stripped of all diplomatic privileges. Silence followed. A silence so thick it felt like the vacuum of space itself. Then a slow, sharp exhale cut through the stillness. Ambassador Julian Carter, the highest-ranking human in the council, stood frozen at his podium. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edges. He had expected resistance, maybe even sanctions, but complete expulsion? This was a declaration of exile. His voice was cold steel when he spoke. On what grounds? The speaker's multifaceted eyes blinked in unison. Humanity has displayed repeated acts of aggression, territorial expansion, and defiance of council decrees. Your race has proven itself disruptive to the galactic order. Julian scoffed. Disruptive? He looked around the chamber at the gathered species, some with fur, some with scales, others with bioluminescent flesh that pulsed like a heartbeat. We bled in your wars. We traded fairly. We honored our commitments. And now you cast us aside because we refuse to be subservient? A reptilian delegate from the Auric Dominion let out a low hiss. Humans do not follow the Council's will. They build weapons beyond our restrictions, colonize planets outside their assigned zones, and interfere in conflicts that do not concern them. Julian's jaw tightened. We defend ourselves. We defend those who are too weak to fight for themselves. His gaze swept across the room, landing on the representatives of races that humanity had helped liberate from oppression. The Ashari, the Vorthans, none of them spoke now. Fear ruled them. The speaker made a dismissive gesture. Your presence disrupts the balance. Therefore, it is decided. The decision is final. Julian's breathing was steady, but his blood boiled. He had spent a lifetime working to keep humanity in the Council, believing diplomacy was the path to survival. But now he saw the truth. The Council had never wanted humanity as equals. They wanted humans in chains or not at all. Slowly he straightened his suit, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles. He looked up at the assembly with calm defiance. Very well, he said. Humanity will leave. The speaker nodded. Then the matter is settled. Julian turned to go but stopped at the threshold. He glanced back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. You think you've won today? That by pushing us out you've contained us? His voice was quiet, but it carried across the chamber like a distant thunderstorm. You don't realize what you've done. A pause. You have just freed humanity from every treaty, every limitation, every law that bound us. Silence fell over the chamber once more. Julian gave a slow, sharp smile. Now, we decide our own fate, and soon, we'll decide yours. With that, he walked out. The Council had cast humanity aside, thinking they were cutting off a problem. They had only created their greatest threat. Julian Carter stepped onto the shuttle that would take him back to the human embassy, though after the council's decision, it was no longer an embassy, but just another building waiting to be seized. He barely noticed the polished floors beneath his boots, or the cold efficiency of the ship's interior. His mind was elsewhere. As the doors sealed shut, his aide, a sharp-eyed woman named Lieutenant Sarah Kwan, folded her arms. That went about as well as expected. Julian exhaled sharply. I should have seen it coming sooner. The signs were there, the restrictions, the constant votes against us, the so-called sanctions. This wasn't a trial, it was an execution. Sarah leaned against the bulkhead. So what now? Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out of the viewport as the shuttle disengaged from the council station. The endless black of space stretched before them, but it no longer felt like the void of exile. It felt like a frontier. Finally, he turned to her. We go home. We tell them exactly what happened. His voice hardened. And then we prepare. Sarah raised an eyebrow. For what? For the moment, the council realizes they just made the worst mistake in galactic history. The return to Earth was met with outrage. The broadcast of the council's decision spread like wildfire across the colonies, the megacities of Terra, and the outer human settlements. The news wasn't just about expulsion, it was about betrayal. The politicians were furious. The generals were livid. The people? They were beyond anger. For years, humanity had played by the rules, believing they could prove themselves. They had bled and sacrificed, thinking they could earn respect. But the moment the elder races felt threatened, they had cut humanity loose like an inconvenient problem. That was their first mistake. Within days, the Terran Coalition's leadership convened in a war room deep beneath Earth's surface. It was an emergency session, but unlike past diplomatic meetings, this one had no talk of negotiation or reconciliation. President Evelyn Ward, a woman known for her ice-cold pragmatism, stood at the head of the table. The council thinks they've contained us, she said, voice measured but firm. They believe that by exiling humanity, they've defanged us. I say we prove them wrong. Across from her, Admiral Tobias Grant, a grizzled veteran of the Orion conflict, let out a low chuckle. They wanted us to stay in our lane. I say we build our own damn highway. Julian leaned forward. The council relied on us. Our technology, our industrial might, our willingness to innovate where they feared change. Now, they think they can do without us. He let the weight of his words settle. They're wrong. The room was silent for a moment. Then, Evelyn nodded. Then it settled. We will no longer abide by council treaties, trade restrictions, or military limitations. She met the eyes of every leader in the room. From this moment on, humanity does not answer to the council. We answer only to ourselves. The declaration spread like a shockwave. Humanity had just declared total independence from the Galactic Order, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Back in the core worlds of the Council, news of humanity's response caused a different kind of ripple. The elder races had expected protests, anger, maybe even some posturing. They had not expected humanity to go silent for weeks, and then re-emerge with something terrifying. The first sign that the Terran Coalition was not backing down came when the Trade Guild reported the sudden disappearance of human-built ships from Council-controlled space. Entire fleets of industrial freighters, scientific research vessels, and deep space surveyors had simply vanished. At first, the Council thought this was a retreat, a quiet surrender. They were wrong. On the edge of Council space, in the lawless systems beyond their control, humanity had begun something new. A war machine was being built. For decades, the Council had kept humanity's military potential suppressed, limiting fleet sizes, restricting weapons research, and ensuring no one species could challenge their authority. But now, with those restrictions gone, humanity was free to evolve as they saw fit. And humans, when left to their own devices, had one unparalleled talent. They adapted. No longer shackled by outdated treaties, human engineers began developing new ship designs, ones that ignored the Council's outdated doctrines. Where other species relied on traditional shield generators, humanity pushed forward with kinetic barrier systems, miniaturized warp drives, and self-repairing hull plating. The first prototype Dreadnought rolled off the assembly line 6 months later. It was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Heavily armored, brutally efficient, and armed with weapons that ignored Council-standard defense systems, it was not just a battleship. It was a message that humanity would never be controlled again. And soon, the Council would learn that firsthand. The first sign of humanity's return to the galactic stage wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a fleet parked in orbit over a Council world. It was silence. For months, humanity had withdrawn from the usual interstellar trade routes. Their colonies went dark, communication hubs stopped transmitting, and even black market channels, once filled with human-made goods, dried up overnight. The Council expected this to be the last stage of humanity's defiance, sulking in exile, waiting for an opportunity to beg for re-entry. Instead, something far worse happened. The Council's reliance on human technology became painfully obvious within weeks. Despite their restrictions, humanity had become the backbone of several key industries. Shipbuilding efficiency dropped across multiple core worlds, as human-engineered assembly techniques had been quietly integrated into galactic infrastructure. Automated medical systems, many based on human-developed nanotechnology, began to fail without access to Terran research. Even the simple but effective supply chains built with human efficiency started to break down. It was like a virus had entered the veins of the galaxy, not a biological one, but an economic one. And the true impact had yet to be seen. Deep within a human-controlled system, far beyond the reach of the Council's oversight, an underground military research station floated above the planet of Kessera 4. It was one of dozens of hidden facilities that had emerged in the wake of humanity's exile. Inside, some of the brightest human minds worked without restrictions. No more bureaucratic red tape, no more diplomatic oversight, no more elder species telling them what was ethical or acceptable. Dr. Hadrian Voss, lead scientist of the Experimental Warfare Division, stood in front of a vast display screen, his fingers tracing over complex energy signatures. His audience, military leaders, engineers, and political figures, watched with interest. "We were forced to play by their rules for too long," Voss said, adjusting his glasses. "Forced to suppress our technological advancements, but now?" He smiled. "Now, we can truly evolve." The screen flickered to life, showing a sleek, predatory warship, something unlike the bulky, standardized vessels the Council used. Its hull was dark, designed for stealth. Its weapons systems were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. "We call it the Revenant-class battleship," Voss continued. "It doesn't rely on traditional energy shielding. Instead, it uses an adaptive plating system that absorbs incoming fire and redistributes the energy to its own weapons." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Admiral Tobias Grant leaned forward. "And the prototype?" Voss's grin widened. "Already operational." The first battle wasn't a battle at all. A lone Revenant-class warship entered a Council-controlled system under the cover of darkness. It didn't broadcast any signals. It didn't announce itself. It simply arrived. And then, without warning, an entire Council patrol fleet went dark. No distress calls, no debris, no survivors. The Council's response was immediate. A task force was dispatched to investigate. But when they arrived, all they found was an empty void, no sign of the missing ships. It was the beginning of a terrifying realization. Humanity was no longer fighting for a seat at the table. They were preparing to flip the table over. The council's leaders gathered in an emergency session, their voices raised in panic. The disappearances, the economic disruptions, the growing rumors that humanity had developed weapons far beyond their control. It was all spiraling too fast. "We need to re-establish control," a Zalari ambassador snapped, his long serpentine tail twitching with frustration. "Humanity cannot be allowed to operate outside our oversight." "They're already beyond our oversight," a Vorthon general growled. "We thought we were exiling them. Instead, we've created an enemy that has no reason to hold back." The Speaker of the Council, for the first time in his long life, felt fear. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would return to the galactic stage. It was a question of how much destruction they would leave in their wake when they did. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to answer that question, an alert blared across the chamber. A human fleet had just appeared on the Council's border, not in secrecy, not in hiding. This time, they wanted to be seen. And the message was clear. The exiles had returned. The Council border world of Vena 3 had long been considered an unshakable stronghold. A fortress planet, its orbital defenses were among the most advanced in the galaxy. Shielded stations, anti-ship batteries, and fleets of patrol cruisers ensured that no enemy force could ever breach its defenses. But for all its might, it was built for conventional threats. And humanity was no longer a conventional enemy. The Revenant-class battleships did not arrive in grand formations, nor did they challenge the Council to a fair fight. They didn't need to. Instead, they slipped past long-range sensors like ghosts, their adaptive plating rendering them invisible to traditional scanning technology. When the attack came, it wasn't with a barrage of heavy cannons or fleet engagements. It started with silence. A single warning beacon flickered out. Then another. And another. By the time Vena 3's defense command realized something was wrong, they had already lost half their early warning systems. Admiral Sarek, a hardened veteran of the Council's many wars, stood rigid in the command center, his frilled crest rising in agitation. "Report!" he barked. One of his officers, a pale-skinned Aelari, swallowed hard. "Sir, we're losing contact with our outer patrols. No distress signals, no wreckage, just nothing." Sarek's claws tapped against the console. "No fleet movements? No warp signatures?" The officer hesitated. "There was something. Brief distortions, almost like—" The lights flickered. The sound of Vena 3's orbital alarm screamed through the station. Then the first explosion came, not from outside the station, but from within. Sarek barely had time to register what was happening before the station trembled under a direct impact. The view screens lit up with reports of internal fires, breached corridors, and weapons systems shutting down. "How?" he roared. "Where is the enemy?" No answer came, because the enemy was already inside. Humanity had learned from its wars on Earth, from centuries of asymmetric combat and insurgencies. They knew that brute force wasn't always the answer, that sometimes the best way to destroy an empire wasn't with fleets and armies, it was with precision. The first phase of the attack had been an infiltration. Small, undetectable stealth pods had latched onto key stations in the Vena 3 defense network days before the attack. Elite human operatives, trained in zero-G warfare, had breached the stations in silence, disabling security, planting sabotage charges, and hijacking control systems. By the time the Council fleet realized they were under attack, they were already crippled. The second phase was pure, calculated destruction. With Vena 3's defenses in chaos, the Revenant battleships finally revealed themselves. Their dark hulls shimmered as they dropped their stealth fields, weapons systems coming to life with terrifying efficiency. Instead of firing traditional energy-based weapons, they unleashed hyper-accelerated kinetic rounds, slugs the size of small ships, traveling at near relativistic speeds. Council shielding, designed for plasma and laser warfare, proved useless. Ships were torn apart in seconds, their hulls crumpling like tin under the sheer force of the impacts. Defense stations detonated as precision strikes targeted their reactors. Admiral Sarek could only watch in horror as his unshakable stronghold fell apart piece by piece. And then, the final blow came. A single transmission, broadcast across every channel. Julian Carter's voice. "This is not an invasion. This is not a conquest. This is a reminder." His tone was calm, steady, deadly. "You exiled us. You cast us aside like we were nothing. Now, you will learn what it means to truly be nothing." The transmission cut, and Vena 3's central command station erupted in a fireball that could be seen from orbit. The Council received the news in stunned silence. Vena 3, a fortress world, had been dismantled in a single night. No drawn-out battle, no desperate last stand, just pure, surgical annihilation. For the first time in centuries, the Council leaders realized something terrifying. Humanity was not just returning. They were hunting. And the rest of the galaxy was next. The Galactic Council had never known fear. For thousands of years, they had ruled through diplomacy, trade, and, when necessary, military intervention. The lesser species obeyed, the greater empires coexisted, and the balance of power remained intact. Until now. The attack on Vena 3 had shattered their illusion of control. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Supply lines collapsing, colonies going silent, entire fleets vanishing into the void. The humans weren't waging war like any species before them. They were erasing their enemies before they could even fight back. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, the Council's ruling members sat in grim silence. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of fear and disbelief. The speaker, his golden carapace dulled with stress, scanned the room. This cannot continue." His voice lacked its usual authority. "We must re-establish control." An Auric Dominion warlord slammed his fist against the table. "Control? Do you understand what we are facing? They are striking without warning? They are fighting like no species we have ever encountered. We need to retaliate before they carve us apart." A Vorthon ambassador bared his fangs. "They fight like cornered animals. We should crush them before they grow bolder." The room erupted into arguments. Some called for all-out war, others for immediate peace talks. But for the first time in history, none of them truly believed they had the upper hand. And then the doors opened. A lone figure entered, a shadow against the grand chandeliers and golden walls of the assembly hall. Admiral Sarek. He was one of the few survivors of Vena 3. His once pristine uniform was torn and burned, his left arm bandaged from plasma burns. He walked with a limp, but his eyes were filled with something even deadlier than pain. Understanding. He knew what they were up against. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. "You think this is a war," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "It is not." The speaker hesitated. "Then, what is it?" Sarek exhaled, his frilled crest flattened, a sign of weariness. "A reckoning." Across the galaxy, humanity continued its silent conquest. They didn't launch grand invasions. They didn't occupy planets or demand surrender. They simply removed obstacles. Key military outposts fell in single strikes. Supply chains collapsed as human black ops teams sabotaged critical industries. Council spies were fed false information, led into traps, and eliminated before they could report back. The humans weren't just fighting the Council. They were dismantling it, one system at a time. The Revenant-class battleships became the stuff of nightmares. Entire fleets were assigned to track them down, only to disappear without a trace. Their hulls, once thought to be myths, were now recognized by terrified officers, seconds before they were torn apart by kinetic weapons that ignored shields like they were paper. Every fleet lost, every base destroyed, sent a clear message. Humanity was no longer content with survival. They were ascending, and the galaxy could either step aside or be buried. In the depths of space, on an uncharted planet, Julian Carter stood before the leaders of humanity. The underground war council was held beneath the surface of a dead world, far from prying eyes. Around the massive table sat Earth's most powerful figures: military commanders, political leaders, and scientific pioneers who had been freed from the council's shackles. President Evelyn Ward surveyed the room. "The council is weakening," she said, "but they are not yet broken. They still have fleets. They still have allies, and they will not go down quietly." Admiral Tobias Grant leaned forward. "Then we don't give them a chance to scream." Julian smiled. They all knew what had to happen next. The council had tried to exile humanity, thinking they were removing a problem. Instead, they had created a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And now, the time had come to deliver the final blow. The final war had begun. The council, once the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, now stood on the precipice of destruction. Their fleets, once thought invincible, had been shattered. Their political alliances, once unbreakable, had crumbled under the weight of humanity's relentless campaign. And now, the Terran coalition was ready to deliver the death blow. The Council's remaining forces gathered at the capital world of Xiphos Prime. It was the heart of the Galactic government, the seat of power that had ruled for thousands of years. A fortress planet protected by orbital defense grids, planetary shields, and the last great fleets of the elder races. If humanity wanted to end this war, they would have to break Xiphos Prime. But they had no intention of engaging in a prolonged siege. They had something better. Above the darkened surface of an unnamed moon, the Terran fleet assembled. It was unlike any fleet the galaxy had ever seen. No more outdated Council-approved ships. No more restrictions on military technology. This was humanity, unleashed. Sleek, black warships lined the void, their hulls humming with energy. Dreadnoughts bristling with railguns capable of firing rounds at near-light speeds. Experimental stealth cruisers designed to vanish from sensors even in the middle of battle. Strike carriers loaded with boarding pods, their payloads carrying the deadliest soldiers ever trained. And at the center of it all, the flagship of the fleet, the Revenant Prime. Julian Carter stood on the command deck, staring at the holographic display of Xiphos Prime. "We end this tonight," he said, his voice calm, determined. "No speeches, no negotiations. The Council didn't give us a second chance. We won't give them one either." The order was given. Humanity moved. The Council's final fleet, battered but determined, formed a defensive perimeter around Xiphos Prime. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of fighters, all standing between the planet and annihilation. But it wouldn't be enough. The battle began with a silence that was deafening. Then, in a single moment, chaos erupted. Human warships descended upon the enemy like predators in the night. The Revenant-class battleships unleashed kinetic rounds so fast they ignored traditional shielding, tearing through enemy hulls like paper. Human strike teams infiltrated command stations, shutting down defenses before the enemy even knew they were breached. The Council's forces fought back desperately, but for every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. And then, the final phase began. Julian's voice echoed across the battlefield. "Deploy the hammer." From the depths of space, a single warship emerged. It was unlike any human vessel before it. It was the culmination of every piece of stolen Council technology, every experiment deemed too dangerous, every advancement humanity had been forced to suppress. It was the Hammer of Terra, a mobile weapons platform capable of focusing the energy of an entire star into a single devastating strike. As it locked onto Xiphos Prime, the Council leaders realized the truth. This wasn't just an attack. This was extinction. Panic spread through the Council chambers. Some begged for mercy, some tried to flee, others simply collapsed into silence, understanding that their reign had come to an end. Julian Carter gave them no quarter. The hammer fired. The skies of Xiphos Prime burned. The planet, once the heart of the galaxy's greatest empire, was reduced to nothing but fire and ash. The war was over. The Council was no more. Humanity had been cast out, exiled, betrayed. Now they ruled the galaxy, and the stars would never forget the price of their vengeance. The war had ended. The Galactic Council was no more. Xiphos Prime, once the beating heart of the galaxy's rulers, was nothing but a smoldering ruin, an eternal monument to humanity's wrath. The surviving members of the elder races, those who had not perished in the fires, scattered like insects fleeing a broken nest. But humanity had no interest in extermination. They had made their point. Now they would build something new. In the aftermath of the war, the stars fell silent. For centuries, the Council had been the unshakable authority of the galaxy, dictating laws, shaping empires, deciding the fates of entire civilizations. Their word had been absolute. Now, their banners lay in the dust. What took their place was not another empire, nor a dictatorship. It was the Terran Dominion, and it was built upon one simple truth. Humanity alone would decide the fate of the galaxy. Across the known systems, the shift in power was immediate and absolute. The old trade routes, once controlled by Council bureaucrats, now fell under the iron grip of the Dominion. No goods moved, no ships flew, no colonies thrived unless they did so under humanity's watchful eye. Some species, broken and desperate, surrendered without question. They had seen what happened to those who defied humanity, and they would not make the same mistake. Others, still clinging to the shattered remnants of the old order, attempted to resist. They were erased. No mercy, no negotiations. The Council had taught humanity that weakness invited betrayal. Humanity would never be weak again. On Earth, in the heart of the Dominion's capital, Julian Carter stood in the grand chamber of what was once the Terran Coalition's War Council. Now, it was something far greater. It was the seat of power for the most dominant force the galaxy had ever known. President Evelyn Ward sat at the head of the new Dominion government. She was no longer a mere politician. She was the ruler of a civilization that had reshaped the fate of entire species. Admiral Tobias Grant stood at her side, overseeing the expansion of the Dominion's fleets. The Revenant-class warships were no longer just tools of vengeance. Now, they were instruments of control, patrolling the stars, ensuring humanity's rule remained unchallenged. Julian himself had been offered a position in this new order, Supreme Chancellor of Galactic Affairs. The title meant nothing to him. Only the outcome mattered. He had seen what the Council had done to humanity. He had ensured they would never do it again. And now, as he looked upon the map of the known galaxy, one final question remained. What came next? Not everyone accepted humanity's rule. Scattered across the stars, remnants of the old Council still plotted in the shadows, hidden enclaves, rogue admirals, desperate leaders, those who refused to submit. They whispered of resistance. They dreamed of vengeance. But humanity had already foreseen this, and they had one final message for those who dared to challenge the new order. A single broadcast, sent to every remaining faction, every hidden world, every shadow of rebellion. Julian Carter's voice, calm and unyielding. We gave you peace. You gave us war. We gave you trust. You gave us exile. We gave you mercy. You gave us betrayal. A pause. You wanted us gone. You wanted us erased. You wanted us forgotten. A cold, quiet chuckle. Now you will never forget us. The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, the survivors of the old era realized the truth. The war had not ended. It had only just begun. Decades passed. The galaxy, once ruled by the arrogance of the elder races, now bore the mark of humanity's reign. The Terran dominion stretched from one end of known space to the other, an empire forged not through diplomacy, but through fire and vengeance. The last remnants of the old council had been hunted down. Some had fled to the uncharted edges of the galaxy, clinging to the desperate hope that humanity's reach would not extend that far. Others had attempted to rebuild in secret, gathering in hidden enclaves, whispering of rebellion. But there was no rebellion. There was no uprising. There was only the Dominion. Earth was no longer just the birthplace of humanity. It was the core of civilization itself. What had once been a planet of warring nations and fragile alliances was now the most fortified world in the galaxy, a symbol of absolute power. The skies above it were crowded with warships, orbital platforms, and defense grids so impenetrable that no force could ever hope to lay siege to it. In the halls of the Dominion's capital, Julian Carter stood upon a balcony, overlooking the great city that had risen from the ashes of humanity's past. He was older now. The years of war had left their mark. His hair had grayed, his face was lined with the weight of the choices he had made. But there was no regret. He had done what needed to be done. Beside him, President Evelyn Ward remained as calculating as ever. She had guided humanity through war, through conquest, through ascension. And now, she guided it into an era where humanity was untouchable. Admiral Tobias Grant, though no longer a man of war, still commanded the fleets that patrolled the galaxy's farthest reaches. His forces ensured that the Dominion's rule remained undisputed. Humanity had achieved something no species had ever done before. They had become gods. And yet, Julian could not ignore the whispers. There were those who feared what humanity had become. Not the remnants of the Council, those had been crushed long ago, but within humanity itself. There were those who remembered a time before the Dominion, a time when humanity had fought not for dominance, but for survival, a time when they had dreamed of unity, not conquest. The Dominion had brought order. But at what cost? Cities gleamed under artificial suns. Planets thrived under humanity's control. But fear ruled the stars. No one dared oppose humanity, not because they agreed with them, but because they knew what happened to those who did. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, in the lawless systems beyond the Dominion's reach, something began to stir. Not an army, not a fleet. A question. Had humanity won? Or had it lost itself in the process? Julian Carter stood in his chamber, staring at the stars beyond Earth's skies. He had fought for humanity's place in the galaxy. He had won. But as he looked at the vast empire they had built, he found himself wondering. Had they simply become the new council? The very thing they had once fought against? A shadow passed across his reflection in the window. Evelyn Ward stood behind him, her voice quiet but firm. "You feel it too," she said. It wasn't a question. Julian exhaled. "We built something unbreakable." "Yes. But is it right?" For the first time in years, Evelyn did not have an answer. Silence stretched between them. Then the door chimed. A message had arrived, not from a Dominion world, not from an ally, from the unknown. A new voice, a new power rising in the darkness, and for the first time since humanity's exile, Julian Carter felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. The cycle was not over. History was not finished. The future was calling. And humanity would have to decide what kind of gods they truly wished to be. The war was over. At least that's what the galaxy believed. The Dominion of Varak, a vast empire spanning hundreds of star systems, had shattered Earth's defenses in a brutal campaign. Humanity had fought like demons, but in the end, their fleets burned, their colonies were silenced, and their homeworld lay in ruins. The final broadcast from the Terran High Command had been brief, but its hopelessness echoed across the void. "This is Admiral Grayson of the Sol Defense Fleet. Earth has fallen. We failed. If there are any survivors out there, forgive us." That had been 3 months ago. Now Earth belonged to the Varak. The once thriving world had been reduced to a subdued, occupied husk. Patrols of reptilian Varak soldiers roamed the broken cities, their crimson armor glinting under an unfamiliar sky. Human survivors were rounded up and processed into labor camps, their spirits crushed, their hope extinguished. Across the solar system, the remnants of humanity's once mighty fleets drifted in silence, burnt-out wrecks circling dead space. The Dominion had left them there as a warning to any race foolish enough to resist their rule. No one expected a fight anymore. No one expected revenge. But then, the warship arrived. It came out of nowhere, an impossibly massive vessel, slipping into real space at the edge of the system. It was black as the void, its surface scarred from battles long past, its engines burning with an unnatural glow. It wasn't on any known registry, not in Dominion records, nor in the Terran fleet's final logs. The ship shouldn't have existed. And yet there it was, a lone human warship standing against an empire. And it was very, very angry. The Varak Dominion's occupation fleet detected the anomaly immediately. Inside the bridge of the Harbinger of Dominion, a massive command ship stationed in Earth's orbit, Fleet Commander Jorvas narrowed his slitted yellow eyes at the readings flashing across his displays. An unidentified vessel had entered the Sol system. "Impossible," he muttered. "No human warships remain. Their fleet was annihilated." His second-in-command, a hulking Varak enforcer clad in ceremonial crimson armor, growled. "A sensor ghost, perhaps? A wreck drifting back into real space?" Jorvas bared his fangs in irritation. "Number it's transmitting a Terran military code, an old one, but valid." He tapped a claw against the control panel, enhancing the image. The ship was massive, larger than anything the Terrans had deployed in the war. Its hull was a patchwork of battle scars and heavy plating, covered in blackened scorch marks and plasma burns. The vessel's engines pulsed with a deep, menacing glow, and along its surface, old Terran insignias flickered in and out of view, their paint long worn away. Most disturbing of all, the ship's name suddenly registered on their system, TNS Revenant. A ripple of unease spread through the command bridge. "The Revenant," one of the officers whispered. "That ship was—" "Destroyed," Jorvas finished, his throat tightening. 30 years ago. It had been one of humanity's black projects, a prototype dreadnought rumored to be the most advanced warship ever conceived. It had vanished before the war even began, lost in some classified deep space mission. And yet, here it was, alive. And it was moving straight toward them. Across the system. On the occupied surface of Earth, deep within the ruins of old New York, a group of surviving resistance fighters huddled around a stolen Dominion comms device. The leader, a weathered man named Cole Mathis, leaned forward as static crackled through the speakers. Then a voice, a human voice, boomed through every occupied comm frequency in perfect, unbroken standard Terran. "This is Captain Darius Kane of the Terran Navy, commanding officer of the TNS Revenant. 3 months ago, you declared this war over. You were wrong. To every human still alive, hold on. The fight isn't finished." The Resistance fighters exchanged stunned glances. Cole felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since the Dominion crushed Earth's defenses. Hope. Above, in orbit, the Dominion fleet scrambled into formation, weapons locking onto the approaching warship. On board the Revenant, Captain Kane stood on the bridge, watching the enemy reposition. He exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening into a fist. "All right," he murmured. "Let's show these bastards why they should have wiped us out completely." The last human warship had returned, and it was bringing hell with it. The Dominion fleet wasted no time. A dozen Varak warships shifted into an attack formation, their sleek obsidian-colored hulls bristling with plasma cannons. The harbinger of Dominion, their flagship, loomed at the center like a monstrous beast, its reinforced armor glowing under the distant light of the sun. They expected this to be easy. After all, humanity's best had already fallen. They had no idea what they were dealing with. On board the Revenant, Captain Darius Kane stood firm on the bridge, his gaze locked onto the enemy formation. The Dominion thought they were fighting the same humans they had crushed months ago. They were wrong. The Revenant had been built for a war humanity never got to fight. A classified superweapon meant to counter far worse threats than the Varak. It had spent 30 years in the dark, perfecting its systems, evolving its technology, and adapting in ways no one could anticipate. And now it was awake. "Commander Vasquez status?" Kane asked. A woman with short, dark hair and cybernetic implants across her temple responded instantly. "Weapons online. Shields at full capacity. They've locked onto us, but they're hesitating. I don't think they believe we're real." Kane smirked. "Let's correct that mistake." He turned toward Tactical. "Fire the Gauss lances. Let's wake them up properly." The Revenant didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead of slow-charging plasma cannons or outdated railguns, it deployed Gauss lances, hyper-accelerated projectiles that moved at near-light speed, capable of tearing through enemy shields before they even had a chance to react. The Dominion fleet never saw them coming. The first lance struck a Varak battleship dead center, bypassing its energy barriers and ripping straight through its hull. The ship didn't explode. It simply broke apart, its core venting into the void as fire consumed its compartments. The second lance obliterated a cruiser in an instant, vaporizing its bridge before its crew could even scream. The Dominion fleet erupted into chaos. "They just one-shot our warships." An officer on the Harbinger of Dominion howled in disbelief. Jorvis slammed his clawed fist into the console. "Return fire! Everything we have!" Their plasma cannons and torpedoes lit up the void, streaking toward the Revenant in a storm of energy. The Terran warship didn't even try to dodge. Instead, its hull shimmered, an adaptive shield system flickering to life. The incoming projectiles bent away at the last second, redirected harmlessly into open space. The few that connected were simply absorbed, the ship's hull repairing itself in real time. It was impossible. The Revenant was absorbing their attacks. Jorvis felt something he had never experienced in his lifetime of conquest. Fear. Cole Mathis and his fighters huddled around their stolen comm unit, listening to the unthinkable unfold above them. They had seen Dominion warships shrug off entire human fleets without breaking a sweat. They had watched Earth's best and brightest burn in vain. And now, one single Terran warship was tearing the Dominion apart like a god of vengeance. One of the younger fighters, a woman barely in her 20s, gripped Cole's arm. "Sir, what the hell kind of ship is that?" Cole swallowed hard. "Our last chance. The Dominion had spent the past 3 months breaking them, making them believe resistance was futile. But now, as explosions bloomed in the skies above, they knew the war wasn't over. Humanity was still in the fight, and this time, they weren't going to lose. The Dominion fleet was breaking. The Revenant moved through the battlefield like a phantom, its engines humming with raw energy as it ripped through enemy formations with mechanical precision. Every shot it fired was a death sentence. Gauss lances and kinetic slugs shattered warships before they had a chance to react. The once mighty Dominion, the conquerors of Earth, were now scrambling to survive. On the bridge of the Harbinger of Dominion, Commander Jorvis bared his fangs in fury. "This is impossible," he roared, his claws digging into the console. One ship is doing this?" His second-in-command was pale. "Commander, we need to retreat." Jorvis turned on him with a look of pure disgust. "Retreat? We have conquered 100 worlds. Humanity's fleets burned in front of us, their armies begging for mercy. And now you!" Before he could finish, another explosion rocked the command ship. A Dominion destroyer, one of their heaviest warships, was torn in half by a concentrated barrage from the Revenant. The wreckage tumbled through space, colliding with another cruiser, sending both into a fiery spiral toward Earth's upper atmosphere. The bridge fell silent. For the first time, the Varak weren't the predators. They were the prey. Captain Darius Kane watched as the enemy fleet faltered. His grip on the command railing tightened. "Commander Vasquez," he said, his voice calm. "Status report." Vasquez glanced at the tactical display. 7 enemy warships destroyed. 4 are disabled. The flagship is still operational, but... She smirked. "They're hesitating, sir." Kane exhaled. "Good. Let them be afraid." For 3 months, humanity had been hunted, humiliated, and enslaved. The Dominion had assumed they had won, that humans were just another species to be conquered and forgotten. But humans had never forgotten. They had never surrendered. And now, the last warship of the Terran Navy was here to remind the Dominion why that was their biggest mistake. "Prepare the main cannon," Kane ordered. The bridge crew hesitated. "The main cannon?" Vasquez turned to him, eyes widening. "Sir, the cannon hasn't been tested since—" "I know." Kane's expression was stone cold. "But we're outnumbered, and I want to make a statement." She hesitated, then nodded. "Aye, Captain. Charging the Oblivion Lance." Planetary Governor Lurvek had spent the past 3 months enjoying his victory. The conquest of Earth had been swift, the humans had been easily broken, and their resistance had crumbled within weeks. Or so he had thought. Now, as he stared at the massive holographic display in his war room, terror gripped his twin hearts. His fleet, was being systematically obliterated. What is that ship?" he croaked. "Where did it come from?" His advisors had no answers. They were just as stunned as he was. A deep, ominous alarm suddenly blared through the command center. One of his lieutenants, a younger Varak, turned pale as she read the data scrolling across the screens. "Governor, the Terran warship is charging a superweapon." Lurvek's blood ran cold. "A superweapon?" "Yes, sir, and—" She swallowed hard. "It's aiming at us." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The war wasn't just turning. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were out for blood. The Oblivion Lance was a weapon never meant to exist. Designed in the final, desperate years before the war, it had been conceived as humanity's last resort, a weapon capable of reducing entire fleets to ash. But before it could be used, the war had ended in disaster. Until now. The Dominion's command ship loomed in the distance, its shields flickering. It was the largest and most heavily armored warship in the fleet. It wouldn't matter. Firing sequence engaged, Vasquez confirmed. 5 seconds to discharge. Kane leaned forward. Let's finish this. The bridge lights dimmed. The ship hummed with unnatural energy as the weapon powered up. A glowing rift of pure destruction began to form at the Revenant's bow. The countdown hit 0, and then the sky burned. A single beam of pure annihilation erupted from the Revenant, cutting across space with terrifying speed. It struck the Harbinger of Dominion dead center, piercing its shields like they weren't even there. For a brief second, there was silence. Then, the entire ship detonated, not just a normal explosion. The Harbinger came apart at a molecular level, its structure disintegrating in a blinding inferno of energy. The shockwave ripped through the remaining Dominion ships, sending them spinning out of formation. Half of them were immediately disabled by the sheer force. The others began fleeing, their commanders too terrified to stay and fight. The great Varak fleet, the one that had conquered Earth, was in full retreat. In the ruins of old New York, Cole Mathis and his fighters watched the sky in awe. The Harbinger of Dominion, the symbol of their oppressors, was gone. The fleet that had once crushed Earth's defenders was now running for its life. Cole's radio crackled. "Resistance forces, this is Captain Darius Kane of the Terran Navy. The enemy is in retreat. If you're still breathing down there..." He took a breath, then said the words that would ignite a planet-wide uprising. "It's time to take our world back." The resistance fighters erupted into cheers. Hope had returned to Earth, and this time, humanity wouldn't be defeated. The Dominion occupation forces were in chaos. For months, they had ruled Earth with an iron grip, confident that humanity was broken, that no resistance could ever rise again. Their patrols had marched through shattered cities unopposed. Their commanders had grown complacent, and their soldiers had treated Earth as nothing more than a conquered prize. Now, the sky itself had turned against them. The Revenant's obliteration of the Dominion flagship was more than just a victory. It was a declaration. It told every human left alive that the war wasn't over. It told the occupiers that their time was up. And now, for the first time since Earth's fall, the resistance was ready to fight. Cole Mathis stood at the center of a repurposed Dominion war room, staring at a holographic map of Earth. Red markers blinked across the display, each one representing an enemy stronghold, fortresses, labor camps, supply depots, and command centers. For months, his people had fought small, isolated battles, struggling just to survive. But now, with the Dominion fleet in full retreat, their planetary forces were cut off. For the first time, humanity had the upper hand. The radio crackled. "This is Captain Kane. The sky is ours. How soon can you launch a ground offensive?" Cole exhaled. "We've been waiting for this moment for months." He turned to his fighters, battle-hardened survivors who had lost everything to the Dominion, men and women who had nothing left to lose. "This is it," he told them. "No more hiding. No more running. We hit them everywhere at once. We take back our cities, free our people, and make them regret ever setting foot on Earth." A roar of agreement shook the bunker. The resistance was no longer in the shadows. The war for Earth had begun. Governor Lurvek's hands trembled as he stared at the battlefield reports. His entire orbital fleet was either destroyed or retreating. The Harbinger of Dominion, the most feared warship in the sector, was gone. And now, human cities were rising in rebellion. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "We broke them. We won. The doors to his command center burst open, and a squad of his personal guards stumbled inside. One of them, bloodied and panting, managed to choke out a single terrifying sentence. "The humans! They're inside the compound." A gunshot rang out. The guard collapsed, and behind him, Stepping over the body was a human woman with dark tactical gear and a rifle still smoking from the shot. Sarah Connors, second in command of the European resistance, smiled coldly. "We're here to discuss your surrender, Governor." Lurvek stumbled back. You can't." Sarah's expression darkened. "Actually, we can." Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder. Earth was no longer theirs. The Dominion was falling. Everywhere, the same story played out. In Paris, resistance forces stormed a Varak command center, using stolen alien weapons to cut through the occupiers. In Tokyo, civilians armed with homemade explosives ambushed Dominion patrols, turning the city's underground tunnels into death traps. In Rio, a former Terran Marine battalion, thought to be wiped out, resurfaced, slaughtering an entire enemy garrison in one night. And in New York, as Cole Mathis led his forces toward the last remaining Dominion stronghold, he received a final transmission from orbit. "Resistance forces, this is Captain Kane. We're deploying reinforcements." Cole's eyes widened. "Reinforcements? We don't have—" Then, the sky split open. From the Revenant's underbelly, dropships rained down, each one packed with battle-ready soldiers in sleek, advanced armor, not resistance fighters, but trained Terran Marines. "Impossible," Cole whispered. "The military was wiped out. Vasquez's voice cut in. "Not all of it." As the first dropship landed, its hatch hissed open, revealing a squad of veteran Terran soldiers armed with weaponry Cole had never seen before. At their head, a tall, battle-worn officer stepped forward, her face grim but determined. "Major Evelyn Carter," she introduced herself. "Terran Special Forces. Thought you could use some backup?" Cole grinned. Now, they had an army. The streets of New York became a war zone. Dominion troops, realizing they were alone, dug in, turning skyscrapers into defensive positions and deploying their last armored units. Plasma fire rained down as human forces pushed forward, their stolen weapons ripping through enemy lines. The Varak fought viciously, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. And as the battle raged, Cole found himself face to face with the last Dominion commander in the city, a towering, scarred Varak warlord named General Korvac. "You think this changes anything, human?" Korvac snarled, leveling his plasma blade. "Your species is weak. You are nothing but—" Cole raised his stolen Dominion rifle and shot him in the face. The general collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Cole stepped over the body. "You talk too much." Moments later, the last Dominion stronghold fell, and with it, Earth was free. Captain Kane watched the final battle from orbit, his expression unreadable. The planet was theirs again, but his mission wasn't over. "Sir," Vasquez said, stepping up beside him, "survivors from the Dominion fleet are making a run for deep space. Should we let them go?" Kane's jaw tightened. The Dominion had come to Earth expecting easy prey. They had razed cities, enslaved billions, and erased entire bloodlines without a second thought. Now they wanted to flee, not a chance. Kane turned to his weapons officer. "Lock onto their ships." "Sir?" He exhaled, his voice ice cold. "I don't want a single one of them leaving this system alive." The Revenant opened fire. One by one, the escaping Dominion vessels were erased from existence. There would be no survivors, no warnings, no second chances. The war had started with Earth burning. It ended with the Dominion burning instead. The Varak Dominion, an empire that had stood for centuries, collapsed overnight. The destruction of their fleets, the loss of Earth, and the utter annihilation of their reinforcements sent a message to every species watching. Humanity wasn't dead. Humanity wasn't weak. And if anyone dared to threaten them again, they would burn for it. The Revenant turned away from Earth, its engines humming as it prepared for its next mission. Captain Kane took one last look at the planet below. They had won, but this war wasn't over yet. It was just the beginning.